Hey guys, welcome back for part 2 of the Chevy Cobalt Misfire case study. And if you remember in part 1, we determined that we had a compression issue on cylinder number 3 where the exhaust valves weren't sealing very well. And before tearing this thing apart, customer wants it fixed one way or another. But while it's still together with a known problem, I want to get some waveforms. So first we'll play around with the paddle probe and see if using secondary ignition patterns, if we can definitively say that we have a problem in cylinder number 3. So this is just for, for the sake of doing an experiment, developing testing methods. We already know what the problem is. Can we develop other tests to accurately pinpoint the problem in different ways? So we'll do that, and then we'll whip out the in-cylinder pressure transducer, and I want to get compare a known good cylinder to the known bad, and just see what the waveforms look like and save them and have them on hand for future reference. So let's play around with the scope. So it's running. It's dead cold right now. You can actually see the shake. The camera's picking that up, but it's doing its thing. So let's see if we can get a secondary waveform here. Alright, so we got a waveform. I got the paddle probe shoved up right against the front of the coil there. That's what it looks like. So you see our turn on of the coil right there, that's the dwell time, and then the firing line, spark burn line. I wish I could give it a snap throttle here to see what's going on. So that's cylinder number 1. I'm just playing around here, and we'll save that and go to cylinder number 3. Well, here's cylinder number 3. Can we tell any difference? I don't know. There's the line kind of curves down here, so let me save this. Cylinder 3 secondary. Okay. So zoom in on a couple of these. So they all kind of have that downward slope of the spark line. Okay, so let's open up the file from the known good. Where is it? Cobalt. Cylinder 1. I mean, can we say that there's something wrong with that versus that? See the downward slope, that's on cylinder 3 versus that's cylinder 1. Maybe. Let's go over to our book here and see what it's supposed to look like. So there's normal cylinder at idle. That's what it's looks like there. A cylinder with low compression will have lower than normal firing kV demand. Okay, and then there's another case here. There's actually one with leaking exhaust valves right there. Burnt or leaking exhaust valves. Erratic firing kV, shorter than normal spark line duration, excessive spark line turbulence. I wasn't seeing that. But a low compression. Let's look at our firing kV compared to a normal cylinder. Higher, let's see, what's a normal firing kV? So this says low firing is 8, high firing is 18 to 20. Okay. So here the scales are irrelevant because we're using a paddle probe, but we had this probe in the same place. Does our, see it says 2.5, we zoom out. So 1.5, 2.5, and this guy, do you see higher? I don't see any big difference here. So, it was worth a shot. Let's do something more fun, the pressure transducer. Alright. Pressure transducer. Cylinder number 2. It's a known good. Here's our homemade version 1.0. I actually modified it yesterday for this case study. Installed a 5-volt regulator in there. So now our calibration should be a lot more usable. So basically the calibration at atmospheric it shows 0.5 volt, and at 150 psi it should be at 4.5 volts. And obviously it can also show vacuum. So if you have perfect vacuum, it will show 0 volts, and you can go all the way up to 5.0, which is about 170 psi. So rough calibration 40, about 38 psi per volt. We're just on a voltage scale 0 to, we're going to be in 0 to 5 volts. So let's start it up and see if we can get a good waveform. Well, okay, we have a 2-cylinder misfire now, right? So let's drop this down. Since we're not looking at very high pressures, let's trigger on a rising edge. Right there. Okay, perfect. So 200 milliseconds, we can even go 100 milliseconds and stop it. Zoom out. Shut her down. So those are our compression pumps there. So let's save this. Let's call it Cobalt cylinder to pressure at idle. Okay. So zoom in here a little bit. So beautiful waveform. Let's do some measurements. So for example, cursor 1, let's put it on the peak. Let's pick one. That zoom range is fine. So at the peak here, you can see our cursor 1 is at 2.7 volts. Now remember, half a volt is atmospheric, so we're about a little more than 2 volts above the 0.5 line right there. So we can actually simplify this a little bit. So the delta, see 2.2 volts, multiply that by 40 psi per volt, so we're getting about 80, a little over 80 psi on that peak, which is cool. Now we can break this up into into the 4 strokes right here. Obviously we're at atmospheric, so that's the exhaust stroke. Then we can go back into the intake stroke, and then compression power. So we have that saved. Now let's move to the cylinder number 3 and compare apples to apples, like what we can see in cylinder number 3. Alright, now we're hooked into number 3, our known bad cylinder. So let's run the scope and pause it. Well, let's let it record the buffer here. We're at 100 milliseconds. So that should be enough. So let's stop it, zoom it out. Okay, cool. See what we got here. Well, first let's look at our peak compression. So let's get this out of the way. So there we're from atmospheric to the top of number 2. See, delta is 1.83 volts. So that times 40 is going to be, I gotta get the calculator out. So 1.8 times 40 is 72, and on the other known good cylinder we have 2.2 times 40, which is 88. So you can see already there's a 16 psi difference just at idle on the peak. Now, can we see anything else? I'm curious about this expansion pocket right here. Now, if you just think about the system, the engine's an air pump. Right here we have intake manifold, vacuum. Okay, so let's get a reading on that. Cursor 1 is at 0.29, 0.3 volts, okay? So we're in vacuum. Now, if the cylinder was ideally sealed, the piston would go up and down. Our pressure on this side should equal the pressure on this side, since we wouldn't be losing any air out of that cylinder. Now, since we are losing air out of the exhaust valves, so right here we lost some air and we're coming back down, the vacuum on this side, this difference should be bigger than the difference on this side. Okay, so let's measure that between here and here. You see our delta is 0.04. You see cursor 1, the value is higher, 0.3, and on the expansion pocket it was 0.25. So let's say the difference is 0.05 volts. I should just get my calculator and bring it over here. So 0.05 times 40 0.05 times 40. So basically on the expansion pocket here we're 2 psi lower than intake manifold vacuum. Okay, so I'm just going to do everything in psi to avoid inches of mercury and pressure versus vacuum. So you can just think of the zero line as being zero pressure. Atmosphere is 14 psi. That's standard atmospheric pressure. And then so right here at 0.25, so 0.25 times 40, about 10 psi. 0.5 times 40 is about 20 psi. So anyways, you can see that we're losing air during the compression stroke, and then we're pulling a greater vacuum than we had originally. That's basically the moral of the story here. So let's compare to the previous waveform we just had. So let's go to our data manager, Cobalt cylinder 2 pressure idle. So let's open that up, zoom in, put some cursors in here. Cursors show. Okay, so let's say from here 0.29 to here 0.26. Okay, so I mean it's not ideal. Our delta is 0.025. What was our delta on this waveform? Our delta was 0.044 compared to 0.025. So obviously the cylinder is losing some mixture, some air on the compression stroke. Now if you look at these waveforms, zoom out, they don't look all that different, do they? Here versus here, I mean, not a big difference. Just eyeballing it. But if you look at the numbers, we can definitely say there is a difference. So in this case, the relative compression test was much more evident in terms of compression loss. And then the leak down test showed us which valves are leaking. In this case, the pressure transducer is not going to tell you which valves are leaking, especially if they're leaking slightly. It could be leaking out of anywhere. The only thing we can say is that cylinder is leaking, okay, on the compression stroke. So there's that. I think enough playing around with the scope. Let's get this head torn off of here and actually examine it, do a visual inspection on those exhaust valves. Alrighty, so we're a couple hours into the job here, tearing her down. So far it's easy peasy. Got the intake manifold off, just a big plastic sucker. How many bolts there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts, 2 nuts. Exhaust manifold, just unbolt it and kind of hang it out of the way. So we don't need to remove that, and just get it out of the way. Valve cover, and to get the timing lined up here before we take the camshafts out, you need to park the number 1 cylinder TDC exhaust stroke. So that's the factory procedure, so I'm going to follow that. And you can see here there are little arrows at 3 o'clock, no, let's see, 2 o'clock there, and about 10 o'clock right there. And you can count links. There are 15 links from mark to mark. I got a little zip tie here right in between, so we can, there's the more places you mark, the better. Down here on the crank pulley, I got a little white mark aligned with that whatever aluminum protrusion. So that's where that's going to stay. Now we took the timing tensioner out, which lives right in the back of the head here. You can actually see, you can push that guide with your, ooh, well, I guess we jumped a tooth there, no big deal. So anyways, we're gonna take the camshafts out here and yeah, go from there. The caps are actually conveniently marked with arrows and numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then here we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so there's no way you can mix those up. So looks pretty straightforward. You don't need to mess with the timing cover. We'll just take the camshafts out, kind of hang the chain here, and then get this head off. I mean, there's not that much more to do. And then of course we'll take a look at those valves and see what's going on. Well, they don't give you enough slop in the cam chain even after removing the tensioner to just slip the camshaft out with this sprocket on there. You actually have to remove the sprocket, and there's a long bolt that goes through it, and that sucker was in there like, I don't know, 200 foot-pounds. You got to hold the camshaft there and get a breaker bar on that bolt. What is it, a 18 millimeter, and get it off. But that's what it takes. So now we're basically home free. We gotta remove both camshafts. I'll leave this sprocket on since now we have plenty of room in that cam chain. And yeah, that's all there is to it. So, and once I take the camshafts off, I just want to eliminate the possibility of like a lifter that's stuck or a spring that's broken on these exhaust valves in number 3. We'll just redo our leak down test and off with the head. Well, you thought it was going to be too easy. This camshaft physically can't come out because that sprocket is hitting on the bottom of the housing there. I thought I was just going to flip this camshaft right out of here. Nope, gotta take that sprocket off. Good thinking, GM. A little more work, but let's break that bolt out. In case you thought I was kidding about those 200 foot-pounds, I'm not kidding. Alright, here we go. Oh. You just build some muscle, right? And once it's loose, it comes out with your fingers. So there's that. Now that cam gear should pop right out. Unless they thought of something else, but here it is. So this is the actual variable valve timing actuator. There's a little pin there. Yep, so before you take these off, you have to make sure they're locked in place. You can actually see how much the timing can advance right there. But now we can take the camshaft out. Alright, just a quick confirmation of our diagnosis here before we actually unbolt the head is that we have our hose and pressure regulator into cylinder number 3. All the valves are obviously closed. We have no camshafts installed. Turn it up. It's coming out the exhaust ports. So that's that. Let's get this off and examine the exhaust valves. Alright guys, here it is. Here's a cylinder head. This is cylinder number 3 right here. So I'll focus you in on the exhaust valves. At first glance, it doesn't look like there's anything, you know, catastrophically wrong. So there's number 4, there's number 3, 2, and 1. Now see this valve right here, the color is kind of weird and different. And let's do a quick check with some compressed air and see if that exhaust valve is sealing right now or not. So, quick and dirty, soapy water. I'll just put some compressed air in the exhaust port. So the top one's real bad. This bottom one, I guess a little bit. Let's try the other ones. Nothing there. Nothing there. Yeah, look at that. See the bubbles coming? So from both exhaust valves on number 3 here. Let's try number 2 for kicks. Those seem tight. Number 1. Fine. Wow. There it is. So our diagnosis was spot on. Where do we go from here? Well, I'm going to take those valves out and see how they look, see how the seats look. But next stop is the machine shop, so I'll let you know what happens. So taking the exhaust valves out, I got this sweet valve spring removal tool from Lyle, 36050. And there are 2 tools in here, a bigger one and a smaller one. We're just using a smaller tool. This is nothing but just a recessed metal piece with a magnet inside. And all you do is you push down on the valve and the keepers should come out right into the tool. There's 1. There's 2. You see the valve cap, spring cap comes off with it. Now we're going to keep everything organized. Keepers, spring caps, springs. Alright, so we got those out. We'll pop these guys out and inspect. Alright, so I got the top exhaust valve out, the real bad one. And to the untrained eye, it might not seem like anything's wrong. If you put a little light on here, the problem is the valve seat. So there's supposed to be a nice sealing surface all the way around, and we can see that sealing surface is actually almost disappeared right there. It's a hard shot, and you can see on the valve right there it's not sealing, it's not shiny anymore. So that's our issue. I don't know what the machine shop is going to do. These seats are replaceable, I think. You can buy them at least. So yeah, we'll go from there, but that's our issue. I guess common GM problem. If you've seen Scanner Danner's case study on the Hummer, he had the same issue. It was a misfire, exhaust valves were leaking. So there you go. Off to the machine shop.